Good evening, friends, fans, and followers. Thank you for joining or chiming in or checking in or watching later or whichever the case may be. Matt with Tails on Trails Deer Tracking, and we are here to talk about tracking deer with dogs, what the hunter should know, part two. Um, but before I get into that, I just want to kind of recap some of the things that I talked about in part one as far as why I'm doing it and what it's here. So I am a new tracker. Um, I went on 42 tracks last year, which is a good number for a first year tracker, but in the grand scheme of things is very small number. But for first year tracker, it's a good number. I learned a lot in those 42 tracks. And the intent of these things that I'm doing here is largely fun for me. It helps keep me engaged in the tracking world when I'm not running a practice track or something, or listening to other podcasts or watching other videos. Um, and it's just fun. My intent of these is to have fun and to base it all in some version of learning. So, and learning largely for those who are not trackers. So, you know, what I'm doing isn't the intent to tell other trackers how to do it or offer recommendations for other trackers. That's not at all what I'm doing. It's here. I'm here to have fun with it and to share information that I have learned through personal experience, that I have learned through personal mentors, that I have learned through podcasts and videos and other readings from other experienced and reputable trackers. Um, so that again is the kind of the root of what I'm doing here. I don't want anybody to misunderstand my intent of these as being a know-it-all, because Lord knows I'm not a know-it-all. I learn a lot myself from doing these because I have to look at things, research things and stuff. So it's all fun and learning. So hopefully, hunters, you watch this and you could pick something up. You can, I would ask you to share it with others. If you have questions, ask. If you're a tracker watching and you want to provide comment or feedback, please do. If I misstate something or something needs to be clarified, please, please comment and clarify. I want to present accurate information, and it's the knowledge. It's what do they call it? It's the wisdom of many, vice the knowledge of one. My knowledge is limited but growing. So anyway, that's the intent here. So last week I guess it was last week we did it. We did the podcast last week. And speaking of podcasts, this will be pushed to an audio podcast on all of the most of the normal platforms. Um, so if you're a podcast audience and you would like to see the visual references here I'll be showing, feel free to go to Tails on Trails Deer Tracking on Facebook or YouTube. You can find it there. And let's hop in, man. So let's just talk about what let me bring it up here. Let me do it differently. Let me make that bigger and me smaller. So what are we going to talk about today? Much better video tonight. Thanks, Ron. Thanks. Yeah, it was lumpy last time, man. It was very frustrating, but much better video tonight. Thank you for that feedback. Let me make this move. There we go. So the topics of the discussion today, we're gonna just briefly cover the takeaways from part one. We're gonna brush on the rules 1 and 1A. I have a clarification for rule 1A. I want to make sure that I get out there. We want to talk about what the hunters can do before the season. We're going to talk about the moment of the shot and the minutes and hours following the shot. The 150 rule, not my rule. I stole it. I made it. I didn't make it up. But I use it a lot because I think it's a good rule. We'll talk about the effects of grid searching. This is where if you are an audio podcast only audience it might be worth going over and checking us out on Tales on Trails Deer Tracking, uh, Facebook or YouTube, because there's a really good visual reference here that it's hard to articulate. You really need to see the reference. We're going to talk about wait times and some other things. So that's on the agenda today. I'll try to jazz through it as clearly as I can and efficiently as I can. But let's just review the major takeaways from part one. Oh, I already did that, didn't I? Oh no, I didn't either. No, major takeaways from part one were rules 101A. We'll talk about in a second. Dogs do not need blood to track. Remember that. Dogs do not need blood to track. They track what they see with their nose, not their eyes in the tracking sense. So they don't need blood. Hot, dry, windy are bad scenting conditions. Cool, wet, and calm are good scenting conditions. Rain will not hurt the dog's ability to track. So remember that, hunters. If you shoot a deer with a marginal shot and it's raining or there's rain in the forecast, don't push a track too soon, because it will not impede the dog's ability to track to a point. Blood is the crimson seductress. It will seduce you into doing things that you really shouldn't do, and it can be very very deceptive too. So, and the difference, we talked about the difference between good blood and trackable blood. So those are things we talked about in part one. If you have any questions about those, chime in. Otherwise, part one's available if you can stand the audio on it. Real quick, rule number one of tracking: be honest with your tracker. Honesty is the quickest path to a track resolution. Doesn't mean it's going to be the quickest path to a deer on the tailgate, because not all tracks end with deer on tailgates, but it's the quickest path to a track resolution, I'll say. And rule number 1A, tracking of tracking: never say never, never say always. So this is what I need to clarify. I got that from Brian Alberta. He's the first one I heard say that. So I credited Brian for that. Brian appropriately let me know that is an Al Sherman saying. He got that from Al. So if you don't know Al, look him up. Dat Spotted Tracking Dog. He is very accomplished, renowned, and humble, but very experienced and accomplished tracker in the tracking world. So thank you for that, Al, and thanks for clarifying that, Brian. So, okay, now we're into it, so before the season, we spend a lot of time doing things before the season to get ready for the season as hunters. So what you can do to best set yourself up for, getting help or tracking a deer, should you need a tracker, is the first thing is get permission from your neighbors to track on their land. Wounded deer can go a long ways. And depending on the size of your property, particularly here in Michigan and southern Michigan, there are very small tracts of land and a lot of people hunting them. I'm one of them. I got a small parcel. We have 5 people hunting it. But I have permission from all of my neighbors to track, should we need to. And my neighbors all have permission to come on our land. It's blanket permission. If you shoot a deer, I want you to come get it. It's that simple. You don't need to ask me. But get permission from your neighbors to track. And not only get permission from your neighbors, but get permission from your neighbor's neighbor. Because, like I just said, wounded deer can go a long way, particularly when they're pushed. They will go farther than you think they do. Or the deer will go farther than you think it did, particularly when it's pushed. So, coming to a property stop it really stinks. Trackers hate it. Hunters hate it. And it really stinks. Some dogs can be sensitive to being pulled off a track, particularly when, the dog is tracking. You've tracked that, 600-700 yards. Everything is adding up that you think the deer is dead. The dog is telling you the deer is dead. The pieces of the puzzle you picked up along the track suggest the deer is dead. You're feeling the deer is dead. You come to a property stop and you can't go. Now, hopefully you can get permission, but if it's in the middle of the night, are you going to call the landowner in the middle of the night? Or, maybe it's in the middle of the day and the landowner's at work. If you're waking him up in the middle of the night, maybe he's going to be a little grouchy and not want you there because you woke him up in the middle of the night, and it's really frustrating. Additionally, you know, some dogs can be sensitive to being pulled off from a track. My dog can be sensitive sometimes that way. She's getting better. She's young, but if a dog is tracking and then the handler stops the dog can get confused, think that, oh, that's not the deer they want me to track. So it goes and finds another line and starts tracking it. That could happen. I'm not saying it will, but it could happen. My dog is a little sensitive to that sometimes. So get permission from your neighbor and get permission from your neighbor's neighbor too. Wounded deer go farther than you think they will, particularly when pushed. So that's always good. Plus, it's just good to know your neighbors. I'm starting to do better with that myself. Made some great connections with my neighbors or on my property here, and then their neighbors. So the other thing you can do is know your tracker. You see on the right side of the slide here is a list of it's a directory of all the trackers in the Michigan Deer Tracking Network that wanted their names listed in the directory, and they're listed by county. This list is published typically in August. It's published by the Michigan Deer Tracking Network, another tracking network in Michigan, Michigan Deer Trackers. They can be confusing. There's the Michigan Deer Tracking Network, which is a list you see. Then there's Michigan Deer Trackers, which is another network. There's a lot of overlap with trackers in both of those, but both of those networks publish lists, and they list trackers by county. So I would encourage you to follow Michigan Deer Tracking Network, follow Michigan Deer Trackers, follow the United Blood Trackers, which is the national organization for tracking. Follow all of those on Facebook. Check out United Blood Trackers website, unitedbloodtrackers.org. There's great resources there. You can find trackers there too. But get this list. Find a tracker that's closest to your hunting ground and give him a call, or her. There's plenty of ladies tracking too. So give your tracker a call before the season. Get to know them. Interview them. Tell them where you're hunting. Interview them. Ask them what kind of information that they would like to see should you need to utilize their services. What kind of information should you provide them. Ask them what their work schedule is so you can get a feel for the flavor of when they're available. Ask them, whatever, man. Just have that conversation, build that relationship. And I would tell you, find the next county over, or the next closest county, whichever the case may be, and make contact with that person too. The nice thing about these networks is if the person in your county is not available, we're not real possessive of the tracks. Our goal is common throughout the networks, and that is to help you recover your deer or come up with a resolution to your track. So if we're not available, we will know a guy who might be, and we can refer you to them, or we can, try to find you help otherwise. So both networks are good that way. So I would encourage you to follow them on Facebook, get these directories that come out typically in August, I believe, and have them handy. Store these trackers in your phone because you might need to call them from your stand. We'll talk about that later. But, make that contact. Make that contact. Trackers like to talk about tracking, believe it or not. So make that contact. So you've done all of that. You've got permission to track from your neighbors. You have made contact with your tracker. You've done all of your season prep. Everything is great. You just shot a deer. Now what do you do? Well, most bow hunters know what to do, but let's just walk through this because it can be very situational. And most of this is from the context of a marginal shot. So what do? You just shot a deer. Pay attention. pay attention to where the arrow hit best you can. Today's modern bows, even the vertical bows, crossbows certainly, it's very tough sometimes to tell where the arrow hit. That arrow was moving so fast. It's very difficult to tell. The other thing, we all want our deer. Our minds are a very powerful thing. So our minds create the image that we want to see very often. And we think we hit the deer in places that we did not hit the deer. But do your best to see where that arrow hit the deer. This is all upon the shot, upon impact. How did the deer react on impact? So, well, the deer ran. Well, I know the deer ran off, but I want to know, what did the deer do the minute the arrow hit it? Did it jump? Did it mule kick? Did it stallion go up on its hind legs? Did it just kind of flinch and hunch? What did it do as soon as the arrow hit the deer? Pay attention to the direction the deer went. Some of this may seem very obvious, but it's worth talking about. Pay attention which way the deer went. We need to know, did it go there? Did it go there? Because the difference between there and there can be a big difference. Pay attention to where the deer went. Pay attention to how the deer was moving and behaving when it went there. So you have the point where the arrow hit the deer. What did the deer do immediately upon impact? And then as the deer left the area, how was it moving? Was he low, tail tucked, death run, tail straight out, spiraling, low, flat out death run? Was he bounding away like he's frolicking in the lavender field? Did he hunch, bound for a second, and stand there for 2 or 3 minutes, then walk away hunched with his tail tucked? All of those little details can help the tracker put together, the what was hit and how to approach that track. So it's those little details. So how the deer was moving, we really want to know that if you can see it. And then, immediately upon a shot, save that BBD Facebook post and text for later. Just save that until you can show them the BB in the picture. Just don't go to your phone. So this is immediately upon the shot. So now that you have done all of that and the deer has left the area and you can no longer see the deer and the direction it went, how it was moving, blah, 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 all of the things we just talked about. Now what do? Nothing. Nothing other than hang up your bow, sit down and relax, or your rifle or whatever. Just relax. Your adrenaline's flowing, you're jacked up, you're excited, or you're freaked out, or if you're like my son-in-law, you're excited and freaked out. Even if it's a good shot, shout out to you, Joel. But just sit down and relax. Crack the thermos and have a cup of coffee. That's what I do. That's my tradition. Sit back and have a cup of coffee and just relax. While you're having your cup of coffee, be listening in the direction the deer went. You're listening for whatever you hear. I don't know what it's going to be. Did you hear a crash? Did you hear it go in there and there was some rustling and then it got quiet for 15 minutes and then all of a sudden you heard some rustling again? Well, that tells you maybe the deer got up and moved off again or something. So listen and pay attention in the direction where you last saw the deer. It's really important also to mark the area where you last saw the deer. Was he went that way? That was by that big oak over there. That's where I last saw the deer. It was by that little spruce right there. It's by that stump, by that rock, by that downfall. Note a physical marker. And I will tell you, go as far as taking your phone and taking a picture of it, put your finger in the frame and point at that downfall right there and then shoot that picture. Because, if you think about it, if let's say you're hunting a field edge, you shoot a deer at last light, You wait the hour. We're going to talk about wait times later, but you wait the hour, you get down, you get up there, and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't find any blood. I can't find my arrow. Oh no, what do I do now? um, you're on the ground. It's going to look a lot different on the ground in the dark than it did, 15 to 20 feet up in the daylight, so you can look at that and reference, that was that downfall right there. Um, you know, maybe it ran across you're on a hunting a field edge and it ran across the 200 yards across the field. And, there's no blood or anything there at the shot site, and you can't find your arrow, and now you got to go across this 200 yards across this wide open field, and you're not sure where that deer went in the swamp or went in the woods. Yeah, well, I think it was right here. If you take your phone, you get that picture, you can like, okay, it was right here. It was right by that spruce tree right there. And that's important, because if there's nothing to go on at the shot site, a lot of trackers, I'm kind of one of them, that likes to start their dog on something, something that indicates that the deer was there, whether it's hair or blood or an arrow or something, that's where we like to start the dog. So if there's nothing at the shot site, we don't know if we're on the right deer or not often. So if we can find where it went in, a definitive spot where we know that deer was, we can start them there. We might be able to start him at the shot site or farther back, but you kind of get the point. We really want to know the last landmark where you saw the deer. While you're sitting there, replay the shot in your mind. Did what you think happened really happen? Man, I'm feeling really good about that. Everything looked great. It was this, it was that, it was the other thing. I'm feeling great about this. Or like, man, you know what? That deer acted a little funny. I'm not sure. I think it might have been quartering towards me more than I thought it was, or whatever that is. I'm not telling you to create, bad scenarios in your head, but just replay it in your mind, and after you've calmed down a little bit, okay, does it make sense? Now, if you had a bad shot, you say you shot your deer and it had all of the it flinched, stood there for 2-3 minutes, and then walked off hunched. That's the classic indication of of the deer being hit too far back in the gut. Sometimes they'll act that way with liver. um and you had a bad shot, call your tracker right then. Call your tracker. You saved his number, it's in your phone. Call your tracker and say, hey Matt, I just shot a deer. I'm pretty certain I hit him a little far back. I was 18 feet in the tree. The deer was at 26 yards. He's slightly quartering towards me. I'm pretty certain I hit him a little far back. He flinched and kind of stood there a second, then walked off. I can see my arrow on the ground, but I haven't got down. What do you want me to do? I'm going to say, great, man. I'm glad you called. So what I want you to do is sit there as long as you can. Sit there as long as you possibly can, and sit there in silence. I'm going to ask you how far the deer was when you last saw it, stuff like that. And then when it's time for you to get out of your tree, depending on how far the deer was when you last saw it, how far it was from your arrow, I might have you go up and inspect your arrow and get confirmation of what you think happened, and then basically get out of there. Then call me back, and then you can get some pictures and stuff of the arrow. We'll talk about pictures later. But if the last thing you saw, if the last time you saw your deer was only 40 yards from where your arrow was, I'm going to tell you to sit there until you physically can't anymore. And then I'm going to tell you to get down as quietly as you can and just leave the area in the opposite direction of the deer, even if that means you have to take an extra 45 minutes to walk back to the truck because you got to walk around something, but it's the opposite direction of the deer. You just really should do that, because you don't want to bump that deer. And we'll talk about that later too. But that's what you do. That's my recommendation anyway, of what you should do on the minutes following the shot. So now you've waited the appropriate amount of time, and we'll talk about time in a minute, but you've waited the appropriate amount of time, and it's time to get down and go inspect the shot site. So that's what you do. You wait the appropriate amount of time. You get down, you go inspect the shot site, and you look for your arrow and you inspect your arrow. The shot site and the arrow is the first indication of what really happened. It's either going to confirm what you think happened, or it's going to um, be opposite of what you think happened, or could tell you a different story. So that's really important. So if you get on the ground and you think you had a great shot, and your arrow and the shot site says confirms, yep, it was a good shot. Cool, you can take up your track, and we'll talk about the rest of it in a minute. But let's assume for a minute that you thought you had a great shot, and you get down and you go inspect the shot site and the arrow, and all of a sudden you find guts on your arrow. That is evidence of what really happened. And it may be contrary to what you think happened. Remember, I said a minute ago, the mind is a powerful thing, and it'll make you think you saw what you wanted to see. Um, Whenever that happens, I know I hit him behind the shoulder. I could see the blood coming out of him. But if your arrow was full of gut, you didn't hit him behind the shoulder, at least as tight to the shoulder you did, and or the deer was quartering toward you much harder than you thought, and it exited through the gut, and you probably only got one lung. One lungs, I don't consider that anything. Deer can live a long time, if not forever, on a one lung hit. We have to treat it as a gut shot. So you must always default to the physical evidence on the arrow when making decisions on what to do, not what you think you saw. So just keep that in mind. So let's assume that everything was good. You know, you thought you had a good shot. The arrow and the shot site indicates it was a good shot, and it's time to take up your track. So this one I'm going to tell you to do, though. Still take pictures of your arrow. And when we say take pictures of the arrow, as a tracker, what I'd like to see is 3 clear pictures between each one of the fletchings. You know, the fletchings are where the lion's share of the evidence collects, assuming you get a pass through, of course. If you don't get a pass through, it's going to be the broadhead and whatever is on the shaft. But if you get a pass through, you got your arrow. You know, take 3 clear pictures between each one of the veins, and take a good clear picture of the broadhead. So that's 4 pictures, clear pictures, because evidence collects there. So take those pictures, even if you think it's a good shot, because my recommendation is, even though everything looks good, you should approach the start of a track as if it's going to be a problem track and you might need to get help with it. If you don't need help with it, fine, you can delete those pictures. But if you do need help with it, now you've got them, and you've got them before the blood is dried and all of that. So take pictures. Mark the hit site and first blood, at the very least, first blood. Mark the hit site and first blood with a high visibility physical marker. Again, even though it looks good, if you didn't see your deer fall, even though it looks good, you should start each track as if it's going to be a problem track, or it could be a problem track. So a high visibility physical marker, not a camouflage hat, not a camouflage glove, not a scuff in the dirt, not a stick stuck in the ground that looks like every other stick stuck in the ground. A high visibility physical marker. There is nothing more frustrating, and yes, I'm talking from experience, there's nothing more frustrating than to spend the first hour looking for first blood in the dark because it wasn't marked, and the hunter got twisted around and a little disoriented in the dark, and we were off on a goose chase. It's a little frustrating. I understand it happens. I don't say that to indict anybody, but if we use a high visibility physical marker to mark first blood, first sign, shot site, you eliminate that as a potential. You can use, if you want to drop a pin on your onyx or something, we're going to talk about onyx next, do that in addition to a high visibility physical marker. So the other thing I tell you, if you have a tracking app, if you have Onyx or any one of the other apps that you can start a track on, start your track, because that way you know exactly how far you've gone. That's one of the questions you're going to be asked: how far did you track? How far did deer go? you'll know exactly how far it was. And then the tracker can look at your track line and say, oh, okay, and get a feel for the flavor of what really happened too. So start your tracking app if you have one. If you don't, that's okay. But if you do, start it. Mark the blood trail as you go. You don't need to mark it every 3 feet, but just mark it periodically. If you're a bow hunter, you know what reasonable looks like. But mark it with a high visibility physical marker. Don't break the limb off and scuff an arrow in the ground. High visibility physical marker. Stay off the bloodline, the blood trail as best you can. We most hunters grew up being told to stay off the blood trail when tracking, and that's good advice. Typically, I think that was in an effort to not destroy the visible sign, the visible evidence, which is a good thing. We like visible evidence, but in the tracking world with dogs, stepping on the blood trail causes other problems, and we'll talk about that later. If you run out of blood, when you come to last blood, mark last blood with a high visibility physical marker. There it is again, high visibility physical marker. And if I can be completely picky, I got this, I think with Shane Simpson, he said the same thing in a podcast. I says, man, I like that. Mark your last blood with a different color, high visibility physical marker than you marked the trail with. So that way the tracker, when the tracker gets there, he knows, okay, we're on a clean line now. Does that make a difference? Not necessarily. But a tracker likes to know, at least this tracker does. I like to know when I'm on a clean line. I like to know that was the last blood. And I know from that point on, it's all dog. So it's nice to know that if you have, you're gonna buy flagging tape, buy 2 colors and use one for your hit site and trail, and use one for last blood only or something. And then the old tried and true, when in doubt, back out. I mean, everybody knows that. When in doubt, back out. Now, what I'm going to tell you about that is when you get to last blood, or you just start to doubt things and you back out, I'd ask you to back out the way you went in. If you can, back out the way you went in. Don't, okay, I went down this way. Well, okay, the truck's over here, I'm just going to go that way. Because it can cause some problems for the dog. We'll talk about that when we get into the grid search section of this of tonight. And then later, I'm going to do a short segment on the effects of grid searching, on using a track line, one of my real track lines, that will show you exactly what happens when the hunter has crossed the scent line and then walks. It's a really good video. So I'm going to do that later. But anyway, back out when you can. If you can, back out the same way you went in, so you're not creating a false line. We'll talk about it more later. So what do you do though when you get to last blood? So you've marked it, last blood. So somehow you have to know that that's last blood. So what did you do? You probably grid search, right? Because that's what we do. We grid search. Oh, let me back up. Don't grid search, but let me back up. Let me talk about the 150 rule first. I got my slides out of order in my head. So the 150 rule, yeah, that I need to, yeah. The 150 rule, not my rule. I totally stole it. Don't remember what podcast I was listening to. I've heard it more than once in all of the podcasts and readings and things that I've done. But I like it, and I have adopted it, and it's in my arsenal of things to talk about with hunters. When you reach the 150-yard mark while tracking, even if you're on blood and you have not recovered your deer, you need to pause. You need to pause and reconsider the circumstances. Why? Because a deer that is hit or smoked or hit in a pump station or drilled or hammered, all of the things that we say as bow hunters, very commonly is dead within 150 yards, and often well within 150 yards, sometimes inside of 100 yards, they're going to be dead. So if you've gotten to the 150 mark and you have not found your deer, you need to pause and reconsider the circumstances. That doesn't mean that your deer's not dead just 20 yards down the line. That doesn't mean that you need to stop tracking at all. That just means you need to pause and reconsider and think back to all of the things that we talked about in part 1, and what's the blood looking like. Put all of those pieces together, and when in doubt, back out. If everything's like, man, it's good blood. Remember the difference between good blood and trackable blood. I really think this is good blood. I waited 3 hours, and the deer acted, all of the behaviors and everything. Then maybe you can push on a little bit, but um, or maybe you need to say, I need to give this deer more time. Call your tracker, dude. I'm at 150. This is the type of blood I got. I'm not sure what to do. The hunter, the tracker will ask you a few questions. And then based on the information, he'll say, well, man, just as long as you got blood, keep going, just go easy. Or he's going to say, you know what, go back to the house, give it 4 or 5 more hours and take it up in the morning, whatever. I don't know what he's going to tell you. It's all very situationally dependent. So, but consider the 150 rule. The other thing I tell you, if you find a wound bed, no matter where you are in the track, you need to stop because you're probably pushing the deer, depending on how long you waited. Um, this is probably a good time to talk about, deer that are hit, gut, liver, that don't die within that 30 seconds of a death run are commonly going to bed down within the first 300 yards. They're going to get to the place that they feel the most comfortable, which might be 300 yards away or it might be 30 yards away. I don't know. But they're going to get to where they're comfortable, where they feel like they're away from the threat and whatever just made them feel bad, and they're going to bed down. And if they're not pushed, it's very common that you'll find them in that first bed. If they're not pushed by man or coyote, it's very common that you'll find them in that first bed. So that's why I say consider the 150 rule. Because if you get 150 yards, you haven't found your deer, and he's laying at 250, and you keep going, and he's not dead, you're going to jump him. And every time you jump a deer, your odds of recovery decrease. So consider the 150 rule. So let me do my grid search lead in all over again. So you're at 150, you lost blood because it's and so what do? Obviously you grid search, right? I hope you don't grid search. Don't grid search if a dog is an option for you. If you have zero intent to call a dog and you're not going to do it no matter what, by all means, yes, I would encourage you to take whatever actions you think are appropriate to try to recover your deer. You have that moral obligation to do so. But if using a dog is an option for you, I would ask you not to grid search. Grid search kind of that phrase sometimes causes trackers to break out in a little bit of a rash. A good dog can work through a grid search, but it just causes a lot of extra energy and time that otherwise we wouldn't have to spend if the area wasn't grid searched. And there are degrees of grid searching, and frankly, I think grid searching really, I suspect that there's not a lot of organized grid searching that shows up like what's being shown here, a real grid. I think it just turns into a hunter and his buddies wandering around the woods looking for a deer or looking for a sign. But so why is that? This is why. So remember I talked about in part 1 that a dog sees with its nose in the tracking context. So if we could illustrate what the dog is seeing through its nose on a clean track, this is a good illustration of what it'd look like here. And for the podcast audience, it's a snow covered field with one single set of tracks walking through it and nothing else. This is the classic example that's used on all of the podcasts and videos and examples and seminars of what a clean track looks like in the eyes of a dog. So this is what a dog sees. This is how we can associate what a dog sees. Very easy to follow. We can follow this, the dog can follow that. So after a grid search, however, it looks like this. And again, the podcast audience looks like a herd of cattle was milling around in the snow. So that's the context. One single track walking through the snow versus a herd of cattle milling around. So what you see here in this herd of cattle track is, this scent line here is still in there, but as you were doing your grid search, hunters, you know, that scent cocktail, you certainly at some point crossed that deer's path and stepped on the scent cocktail that the deer is leaving. And it got on the bottom of your shoes. It got on the bottom of your buddy's shoes. It got on the bottom of your kid's shoes. And everywhere you have walked in the nose of the dog, that deer has walked, because now you're laying false lines, because you've crossed their scent line, and you're leaving the scent. So the dog has got to sort through all of that to find the real scent line. And that can take a lot of time and a lot of effort. Tracking is very mentally fatiguing on a dog. It's largely problem solving, almost a constant state of problem solving for a dog. Now, dogs love it, but it's a huge mental stimulation for a dog, and and it can and it's very exhausting. So let's say, it's the busy season, and your track is the third track of the day for a hunter, or I mean a tracker, and that dog. And frankly, that's about all a tracking team's going to do in a day, is probably three tracks. That's quite a bit. That hunter is absolutely tired, or that tracker is definitely tired, and that dog is fatigued a bit too. And now, if a dog has to sort through a grid search like this, I'm not saying the dog can't do it, but just understand, it is a very it's adding fatigue to the dog. And frankly, a grid search, in all honesty, guys, depending on how bad it was, it could be the difference in a recovery or not. Um, so I would strongly encourage you to not grid search if you are willing to consider a dog. It's like a bowl of spaghetti, and the dog has got to sort through all of those noodles to figure out which noodle is the right noodle for the deer he's after, because there's a bunch of false noodles in there. So that's why we ask you not to grid search. Now, let me be clear too. You know, you come to your last blood, and you advance, 30 or 40 yards, or 20 or 30 yards, to try to find the next spot. Or even if you do a mild arc out, and it's just you, that's not a grid search, and that's okay. Um, you don't know you've lost blood unless you try to go find the next spot. But don't get carried away with it. In a one-man arc, and a one-man penetrating, a trail or two, isn't a big deal, and a dog will sort through that. But just consider that, the effects of grid search. And remember, I'm going to do a short segment on showing you a track line of one of my tracks, um, which is the effects of grid search. It's I think it'll be pretty fun. So anyway, that's grid searching, and why we would ask you not to do it if you want to use a dog. So let's talk about wait times and being patient. So this wait times graphic, I stole that offline. I think I might know who created it, but it's all over the place. Everybody uses it and everything. Um, but I just want you to know that I did not create that. I stole it. But be patient. So wait times. Patience has got to prevail here. So, the line that I use on hunters when we're talking about wait times is: would you rather be anxious for 12 to 24 hours and recover your buck of a lifetime, or would you rather live a lifetime of misery and regret because we didn't recover your deer because we pressed too soon? You tracked too soon. You know, that 12 to 24 hours wait time is temporary. That anxiety is temporary. That misery and regret of not recovering the buck of a lifetime because you pursued too soon, that lives forever. That's lifetime, man. So just think about that when we're talking about wait time. So, heart, double lung, all that stuff. If you see the deer go down, I don't know, just make sure it doesn't get back up for 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever. Go get your deer. But if you don't see it go down, even though you smoked it, hit it in the pocket, drilled him, hit him, all of those things, and you didn't see the deer fall, give him an hour. Just chill. Give them an hour. Remember, dead stays dead. Dead deer won't go anywhere. Live deer that are pushed will. So don't push too soon. Liver, liver. The recommendation here says 6 to 9 hours. I like 8 hours on the liver, and I'm going to tell you, if you're in the peak of the rut, let's say you're after Halloween, you probably better consider pushing those liver shots out to 18 to 24 hours. My friend Glenn, shout out Glenn, and friend and mentor, he tracked a liver shot deer 31 hours after the shot and found him still alive, bedded with a doe. Now they recovered it because when they jumped him, he spent all he had left and he croaked. But 31 hours after the shot, a liver shot, the deer was still alive, bedded with a doe. It tells you how invincible they are. So, in early October, that deer probably would have been dead in 6 to 9 hours. Don't know that, but in all probability, it's reasonable to expect he would have. Peak of the rut, forget it, man. You need to push it out. Gut shot, we're not going to consider a gut shot before 12 hours. 12 to 24 is the bogey there. Remember, dead stays dead, so 24 is fine. And here's the other thing. What about the meat? Well, the clock doesn't start ticking until the deer is dead. So if we wait 12 hours, your deer probably has only been dead for 2. It's going to be fine, and 24 is fine too, particularly in when it's cooler at night. So, and because you have to work in the morning or rain is coming, it doesn't make your deer dead any faster. So just give it time. Time is your friend. Shoulder, high shoulder, maybe a back whack, leg hit, things like that. Those are, you've hit the deer in a non-lethal space. So there's no value in waiting because your deer's, generally speaking, not going to expire from that in any kind of near-term time frame. So the way you approach those is you get on them as quickly as you can with the dog, and you just try to catch up with them and put another shot in them to dispatch them. So let's talk about this for a second. In the state of Michigan, you as it sits today, you do not have to be registered with the DNR to track deer. You don't have to, and that's cool. But if you are a registered tracker with the DNR, it offers certain benefits. And one of them is that the hunter now is allowed to carry the weapon of season, and they can dispatch the deer should you come up on it and it's still alive. That is not hunting the deer. We are tracking a specific deer that is wounded to the point where it can't get away, and you put a close shot on it to dispatch the deer. So, and you can do that in the presence of a dog, and you can do that at night under artificial lights in the presence of a dog. That's what one of the benefits of being registered with the Department of Natural Resources in Michigan for the hunter. You get to carry your weapon. So if you are chasing, if you talk to your tracker and everything suggests that this is a high shoulder or a back whack or a leg hit, and it's one of those hits that you need to pursue it right away with the dog. If that tracker is not registered with the Department of Natural Resources, you're not allowed to carry your weapon, which means if you do catch up with the deer, now the tracker and the dog have to leave, and then you have to go back and get your weapon and come back and dispatch the deer. Oh, and by the way, it has to be in the daylight. You can't do that at night. Oh, and by the way, if it is a high shoulder, leg, or back whack, the deer's not going to be there anyway. So pursuing a shoulder shot, leg, back whack deer, knowing that it's going to take a follow-up shot for final dispatch without a registered tracker is almost a moot point. Now, I say that in the sense of dispatching the deer. there is value in using a non-registered tracker. I don't mean to say that non-registered track that you should be registered a tracker or non-registered trackers can't help you, because that is completely wrong. It is a personal choice whether a tracker wants to be registered. But what they can do is provide confirmation. Yep, we caught up with the deer. It's a shoulder shot deer. Your deer is going to survive. And there's value in that. That is a good track, and that is resolution to a track. That's track resolution. It's not deer on a tailgate, but it's track resolution. So there's value in that. So consider that too. But if your intent is, hey man, I shoulder shot him, I really want to put him on a tailgate. Well, the only way you can do that is with a follow-up shot, and you can't do it with a registered tracker. So anyway, I that can be controversial, and I certainly didn't mean for it to be, but it's also fact. So that's wait time. So we talk about wait times. What are things that influence you or persuade you to not heed these wait times? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's called the 3 B's, a trifecta of trouble: buddies, blood, and beer. Those 3 things can be not, can be very problematic for you on a marginally hit deer. So why are buddies bad? Buddies are bad, can be bad, because what happens? You marginally shoot a deer. You know that you probably need to give him a little bit of time, because maybe you think maybe you got a liver hit. So you go back up to the cabin, the house, the truck, the whatever camp, and you're waiting the appropriate amount of time, and all of a sudden your buddy shows up, and you get to talk to him. I say, dude, man, it was that split G2 buck, that real wide split G2 buck. And you're like, dude, that's awesome. We got to go get this deer. And you're like, well, I think we need. No, man, let's just go out to the shot site. Let's just go see if we can find blood. No, we need to. And you shouldn't go, but you've been looking for a reason to go, and your buddy's now talking you into a reason to go. So you go, okay, we'll go. We'll go see if we can find blood. Cool. So lo and behold, you get out there and you find blood. Well, remember what I talked about in part 1? Blood is a crimson seductress. So now you are seduced to go. So now you see blood. You're like, well, okay, let me just see if I can find the next spot. So you find the next spot. Let me just see. Well, let me go over this hill. Oh, look. Oh my gosh, look at all of the blood. Like, Jim, look at all the blood. Look at this blood. You're dear. So now you're seduced to just keep going because you've got blood. And guess what? So it's an hour and a half after the shot. You hit him in the liver, which requires 8 hours. Oh, by the way, let's say it's November 8th. You probably need 18 hours to 20 hours. But you got blood. So you're chasing this liver hit deer, and you're just pushing the deer. Remember what I talked about property lines. So now you push the deer probably off your property onto the neighbor's property, but you keep going because you've got permission to hunt that or track on that neighbor's land. And now you're pushing off that property too. And remember, every time you jump a deer, your odds of recovery decrease. So that's why blood is bad. That's why blood can be bad. That's why buddies can be bad. Do I really need to talk about why beer is bad? Beer impairs judgment just like blood and buddies do, maybe worse. Save the beer for the after recovery celebration, not the pre-track prep. Don't prepare to do a track with beer. Celebrate the recovery with beer. Don't let buddies, blood, and beer cost you the buck of a lifetime, because it can happen. It can happen. So let's talk about the interrogation. So you've determined that you need to you need to talk to a tracker. You've done everything right because we just walked through it. You've watched his presentation, and you've read other things, and you've talked to other trackers. And you know exactly what you need to do. You know you need trackers. So okay, good. Whoops. So I jokingly call this the interrogation. This is it's just an interview. It's just some questioning. These are some of the questions that I'll ask. These are just kind of foundational questions. Many trackers are going to ask versions of these questions. the response to each question could, prompt more or less questions, or, you know, different questions. So it's very situationally dependent. But anyway, you should be prepared to answer these questions. How far was the shot? We want to know, was it 18 yards? Was it 20 yards? We want to know how high you were in your tree stand. I didn't list it here, but we want to know how high, because we're always thinking about angles. Speaking of angles, what angle was the deer standing? We didn't talk about angles, but angles are very important, because trackers want to know which angle the deer was standing, so we can start to piece together what organs might have been damaged um, when that arrow or bullet passed through. So it's really important, because, if we think about quartering shots, the liver of a deer is favored to the right side of the deer. So if you have a quartering toward shot and you hit it on the left side, you may not have hit the liver. You may have one long gut. If you have a one long gut, you don't start that track. You don't think about it until 12-hour mark. If you hit him on the right side, now you might have one long liver gut. Okay, that's a different wait time. That could be, that 8-hour mark. If it's October 3rd and not November 3rd. You know, so angles are important, and that's just one piece of the puzzle. We will, the blood, the type of blood you're getting, what the arrow looked like, all of that factors into that too. But angles are huge. I ask hunters to use the clock method to describe the angle of which the deer was standing. And a couple hunters just really seem to struggle with that. So when I say, hey, using the clock method, where was the deer's head and where was the deer's tail? Was it at 10 and 4, or was it at 9 and 3? Where was it? Well, his head was turned. I don't literally mean which way his head was facing. I want to know his chest. Where was his chest and where was his tail? So we can get the feel for the angle of that deer in relationship to you. So just be thinking about that. Where do you think you hit the deer? With heavy on the word think. Remember, your mind is going to tell you that maybe you hit someplace you wanted it to hit and it really didn't. So where do you think you hit the deer? That's just, and we kind of take that, I don't want to say with a grain of salt, but okay, that's where you think you hit it. And it's just one piece of the puzzle. How did the deer react upon impact? We talked about that. How did the deer move off? We talked about that. Do you have pictures of the blood in the arrow? That answer will probably be yes, because you've seen this and you know that you should consider taking pictures, even if you think it's a good shot. So we want to see the pictures. How long did you wait to track? Don't be honest with us here. That's a big deal. How long did you wait? If you waited 30 minutes, tell us you waited 30 minutes. Don't tell us that you shot the deer at 9 o'clock in the morning and it's in the afternoon, and you tell us that so you can get us there sooner, when you really shot the deer at 4:30 in the afternoon. Just be honest. It's the quickest path to track resolution, man. Honesty. How long did you wait? How far did you track? We want to know that. How far did you track? How far was last blood from the shot site? Those are the questions I asked. How far did you go when you lost blood? So this question, I'm going to ask this question in two different ways. So, how far did you go after you lost blood? Well, I went 20 yards. Okay, cool. That's good. You should go 20 yards. We talked about that. You should go 20 yards. Okay, great. So then we're going to have some conversation and some other questions. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to say, so what did you do when you lost blood? Well, and that's when the grid search is going to come out. Oh, okay. So that 20 yards, that's how far you went, but it was a 20-yard grid search, And again, that's not necessarily, we understand that's part of it. You don't know, you need help unless you look, and you want to find your deer. So I'm not shaming those who grid search. I just want you to know the impact it can have, though, if a tracking dog is an option. Frankly, a 20-yard grid search isn't that big of a deal anyway. But you see my point, So I asked that question a couple ways, because to see how the answers align. And then, do you have permission to track neighboring properties? That answer should be yes, because you've talked to everybody around you and then their neighbors and got permission. One thing I didn't mention on that, when you're talking to your neighbors about permission to track, be sure you have the conversation with them. Are they okay with you bringing a dog should you need one? Because they may be perfectly cool with you tracking yourself or you and your buddy tracking a deer, but sometimes they can get a little squirrely when you ask about bringing a dog on the property. So make sure you have that conversation with them about bringing a dog. And not that you will need one, but if you do, you know, we'd like to know ahead of time. We don't want to get property stopped, and we don't want you to be upset because we walked in front of or the landowner, your neighbor, to be upset because we were tracking your deer and walked in front of his trail camera, with the tracker with all of his tracking badges on and the name of his tracking service, now caught on camera, and he didn't know that you were going to track with a dog. So we don't want that. Now the landowner's upset with the tracker and he's upset with you. So just have those conversations about using a dog should you need one. You know, so that's the line of questioning. And like I said, some might ask more or different or other questions. I may ask, just depending. It's largely situationally dependent, but those are some of the common questions that you can be expected to be asked. Whoops, went the wrong way there. Bloody button beer. So here are the takeaways. Looks like we're really down there. That was it for part 2. So what are the part 2 major takeaways? Don't pursue a deer too soon. Patience must prevail. Remember, would you rather be anxious for 12 to 24 hours and recover your buck of a lifetime, or would you rather live a lifetime of misery and regret because you pushed too soon and did not recover your buck of a lifetime? I don't think anybody would ever say, yeah, let's go with the second one. I don't think so. So, patience must prevail. The 3 B's, the trifecta of trouble: buddies, blood, and beer, know how they can influence your wait times and be strong. Don't let them, buddy. Don't let them. Do not grid search if a dog's an option for you. We just got done talking about that. In the worst case, it can cost you the deer. In the best case, it's just a minor delay in the track. Consider the 150 rule. If you reach 150 in yards and you haven't recovered your deer, pause. Even if you're on blood, pause. Reconsider the circumstances. You might need to give more time. You may need to call a tracker for advice, but just pause. If you come to a wound bed, stop and call your tracker for advice. Mark the hit site, first blood and last blood, with a high visibility physical marker. No gloves on the ground, no camouflage hats on the ground, no stick stuck in the ground, no scuff marks in the ground. A high visibility physical marker, please. If you want to use a pin on your tracking app, that's way cool, man. Do that in addition to it. Truly can be helpful, but do it in addition to a high visibility physical marker. Get property permissions before the season if you can, at the very least, as a courtesy to your tracker. Have property permissions before your tracker gets there, and your tracker will ask you to do that. A lot of them won't even go. I'm one of them. I won't even go if you don't have permission to track. And think beyond your immediate neighbors, unless they have a 3,000 acre ranch. If you're in southern Michigan, you don't have that. So think about your neighbor's neighbor too. Wounded deer go farther than you think they do, particularly when they're pushed. So please do your best to get permissions, and then know your tracker. We like I said, we like to talk. Follow the Michigan Deer Tracking Network, Michigan Deer Trackers. Follow them on Facebook. Follow United Blood Trackers on Facebook. Check out unitedbloodtrackers.org. Check out their website. Get the published list that both the Michigan-based networks publish around August, that includes trackers listed by county. So have that stuff. Give your tracker a call and have conversations with them. Whoops, I keep going the wrong way. And that's really it, guys. Let me look here. No questions popped up in the stream. So hey, look, I tell you, if hopefully you got something out of this. And remember, my intent is not to this is a hunter-based thing. I'm hoping that if you're a hunter, there's something here you found useful. Please share this. If you watch this back on the if you're watching it on replay and you have a question, man, just chime in. Shoot a comment. I'll get it, and if I can't answer it, I'll get somebody who can. If you are a tracker and have comment, you want to clarify something I've said or correct something I said, I have no shame. Please do. The information I put out, I want to be accurate. So please comment and share. If you're on the podcast audio only audience and you want to see the visual representations I showed here, then go to Tales on Trails Deer Tracking on Facebook and YouTube, and you can see it there. Otherwise, guys, now that the long segments are done, it's time to I'm going to start rolling into short, specific segments. You'll see one very quickly on scent drift. I'll probably send that out next week. It's pre-recorded. I've already recorded it. I'll probably push that out next week on scent drift. Yeah, we'll see one coming up soon on the effects of grid search. Although the track was a grid search, I was on a couple of goose chases on the track because the scent was on the hunter shoes. So that's a fun one too. And I'm going to start trying to bring some people on, some experts on, anybody other than me, to talk about specific topics. I'm going to start working on my Tales on Trails presents Tales of the Track, where we have other trackers on and talk about some of their memorable tracks and some of the lessons that they learned or things that they would like to share from that track. All learnings based. So I realize now I'm at an hour 6 minutes. I apologize for that. I wanted to be within that 45 minutes. So guys, I tell you what, be watching, like and share. If you have questions, hit me up. Otherwise, man, until next time, more the good, less the bad. Talk to you soon.